Hello, my friends. Welcome to New Kids with a Shop, brought to you by the Rcade Comics, Collectibles, and Games, located in fickle Fort Wayne, Indiana. I am Matt Cade.
And I am Craig Ray. And this is Creator Spotlight, Jeremy McFarren. Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Creator Spotlight with Jeremy McFarren. We are here with Shane Pace joining us actually on this one as well.
Hey everybody.
And Jeremy McFarren.
Hello.
Jeremy is a Fort Wayne artist and educator. He's a nationally published comic book artist, and he actually, fun fact, created the design for a lot of our branding at the arcade. Thanks for joining us today, Jeremy.
Plus, he did our first cover.
Yeah.
Our very first cover.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Cool. So we're going to start this off how we do with all the creator spotlights, and we would like to know what your origin story is. How did you get into comics? How did you get into art? And, you know, all the general things that go with that. Why do you love the art form? How did it change you?
Awesome. Yeah, I think I probably got into comics probably the same way that a lot of our generation did, through TV first. So the old Batman show, the old Spider-Man show. I used to love being able to catch Spider-Man on the Electric Company when they had that really terrible costume, and then they would cut, and then the rope would be there for his web. Yeah, it was the best.
That was before McFarlane was in design.
We'd get our underoos on and run around the house and perch on the back of the couch, and it was super fun. And the old Incredible Hulk TV show.
Like, I love Lou.
Oh, scary.
Lou was such a great guy.
He's going to be.
I know, he's going to be up at the Hall of Heroes.
Mm-hmm. And it scared the crap out of me, too. We lived out in the woods, like way out in the woods, and then, this monster on our TV, and we'd be like, oh my gosh, he's going to come get us. But my origin story, the legend, the myth I like to tell is like this lake house summer where I got super burnt, didn't have anything to do, so my parents bought me a couple of comics, and one of them was Superman and Mitzelpick. And another one was like a Spider-Man one, which I forget which that one is. But
for those of you that don't know, he does have red hair. This probably was not an uncommon occurrence.
No, very, very fair. Like the freckles just turned into one giant spot all around my body.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But I stayed inside because I was a hyper kid. I was always trying to do something, and This was the first time I actually sat down to read something. And I was like, oh, these pictures are amazing, and it was just this weird stuff. So I kind of went from there. And
were you already drawing or into art at that time?
I probably was, but I was young, so I just kind of scribbled on everything, And then, but the great thing was, though, is my mom could draw pretty well, and so she would draw these drawings of Superman and Spider-Man and Batman, and then we would color them in.
That might be the coolest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah,
that is really cool, man.
It was super cool, and then I'd just start tracing. And then from there it was like, oh, I can do this myself. And then
my dad drew, but it was all like Frazetta stuff. So he was like, I couldn't.
Big butts.
Like, Dad, what color should I paint the nipples?
You're like, oh wait, Dad, can you redraw that again, please? Yeah. Dad, I lost that other drawing. Can you do this again, please?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I didn't go to Frazetta. I went to the superheroes. But yeah, and from there it was, I just couldn't stop. Like from that point, there was nothing holding me back. It was just comics for comics at that point. So superheroes, Spider-Man, Batman, the X-Men. Once I got into the X-Men in like 5th grade, it was kind of all over at that point.
Who's your favorite X-Men?
It used to be Wolverine.
It used to be everyone used to have Wolverine as their favorite.
Yeah, it always was, especially for angsty Gen Xers.
Yes.
I really got into it right after the Mutant Massacre.
Okay.
And then I kind of got out of it, and then I really got into it when Gateway, or no, what's the guy that's
Gateway?
Gateway, yeah, spun the bull roar, yeah, and took him out to Australia, so that whole thing. So you mentioned Silvestri earlier, and that was my thing,
It's my favorite Dazzler costume.
Yeah, oh, Dazzler was
that design was my favorite she's ever been.
Yeah, with the little jacket.
Yep.
Yeah.
That number 50 die cut cover.
Yep.
I thought was like the top secret Manila
with
fold
the claws.
Yeah. I was like, it didn't even matter that the claws wouldn't have, because it was all irregular. It wasn't even I was like, how did these get here in this shape? Like,
It was perfect.
it's adamantium. Wouldn't it be a clean cut? This makes no sense. But anyway, he was doing all the art at that time, and Silvestri was killing it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Killing it.
Yeah, and I did a lot of work in backwards. So like once I got into it, I'd just go back and dig back because I don't know. There's something about my personality. I didn't really care about collecting. I just wanted more of the story.
Right.
And so I'd just go back and dig, and I dropped the worst one I spent was the Mutant Massacre, I forget what like 220 or something, and I just like I dropped $20 on it at the time, and my mom was like, "How did you do that?" I'm like, "I mowed a lawn."
Was that true?
Yeah, just mow lawns for it, and
Can't be mad at that.
no. And
Awesome.
Now, when you were younger, did you pay attention to did certain artists reach out to you, or did you feel something, or did it change you, or was it just whatever you liked or whatever the story was?
at first it was all about the story.
Yeah.
And so now, like, as I've come back as an adult, it's all about the story. So a lot of times when people ask me if I do comics or whatever art form I end up showing, it's all about the story. Okay. It all just comes back to the story. Now, that having been said, at that point, like, I knew Jim Aparo. I knew Batman as Jim Aparo, and that was it, right? And then Norm Brayfogle came out, and I was like all about Norm Brayfogle, and then Jim Lee, obviously, and
Those are names that have not been on the podcast yet, so I'm appreciative of that.
oh, there it is.
I think Rick mentioned Jim Aparo with Batman, but yeah, that bringing up Brayfogle was great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
Brayfogle. He
Does
is
not get the love.
Yeah, no, he
He's
doesn't, and he
fantastic.
should, 100%. Mike Zeck was a big one, just because he was on all the covers, so you pick him up, and even like you'd look in it and you're like, oh, that's not his artwork, but at least I got the cover.
Yeah. I felt that way about Turner because he
Yeah.
was only doing covers. And I was like, I want more of this. I don't know why, but
it's
Turner
just-
was a
It
big
was,
thing for me.
nice. It was nice looking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, obviously, then McFarlane came out, and that just blew everybody away, and
The Todd father.
the Todd father.
He's
yeah.
on. He's on a lot of lists. I mean, I think
he's
his
all right.
Spider-Man was
He's all right.
undeniable.
Yeah.
I mean, once you added the webbing.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
I love the way he drew the Hulk.
See,
Yeah,
just a few
with,
years
with
before.
that weird little tuft of
Yeah, it was
hair
just
that
a
comes up
Wonderful
front.
design. Yeah.
See, I love McFarlane's work in costume. I think he draws regular looking like
Did you almost say
Spider-Man books in
Muppet?
particular. No, I mean, but like when he drew Spider-Man, I was like, that's Spider-Man. But when he draw Peter Parker, I'm like, why does he look so dumb?
Yeah. He didn't
Like,
draw-
why does everybody have a butt chin? That's
He
not
didn't draw
true.
faces
I'm like, this
well,
is
I
not
know.
even like genetically possible, Todd. Like, it's like, not everybody can have a butt chin. Like, where's your Punnett square? So, anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail it, but I mean, that's just how I
Digression,
feel.
but yeah.
I feel that way about Todd. Like, everything in costumes was fantastic. So that's why I guess I probably have a problem with his Hulk, is because it was like, it was just a 3 times scaled the way he draws people out of costume. So his Hulk to me wasn't like, I don't know.
Oh, no, yeah, I think there's a weird elegance to his Hulk. It's, and maybe because I love that story, the Peter David, because it was like in tandem starting the Mr. Fix-It was coming up.
Yeah. I mean,
Great.
no doubt that time the books were great, but his Hulk never really did it for me.
I mean, I like the way that the capes would change in size from panel to panel.
yeah.
That was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
That was. I mean, it's a made up world. Why not make capes up, right?
that Batman Year 2 cape by Todd McFarlane.
That
Yeah.
okay,
Epic.
That was
That's
pretty good.
that's acceptable.
Yeah.
It's like this is the length of a city block,
Man.
but it's all right.
Yeah. I mean, you do have to give it up for the
Yeah, the shoulder arch.
For sure.
Shoulder pads.
Oh yeah, that's amazing.
So as far as from the educator side of things, like how do you teach? Do you teach comics? And like when you I know you're on the art side of things, but with your emphasis on story so much, do you? I guess how do you teach that? I mean, it's a unique perspective. Like I went to
Yeah.
school for some education, and it's completely different. Like being trained to teach and then actually teaching is completely different than just knowing a lot about something, right? So like how do you approach that on a day-to-day basis as far as teaching art? Because you somewhat have to, and we discussed this a little bit downstairs earlier, you have to disconnect yourself and how you feel about things and just tell facts and let people express themselves how they want to. So how do you approach that? Like separating what you love to just getting people to love what they do.
Sure. Yeah, I think whatever I like to teach as far as the subject goes is to kind of teach the basic box. Like here's skills. So if we say that all of these skills that you have are a box, and that these are the ways that people have always used the box. Now go break it.
Sure.
Right? So like, if I want to teach cartooning or comics or something like that, we're going to start with story structure. We're going to start with developing characters. We're going to start with how to lay out a figure, or how to make marks with a pen, or how to rule things out, or all the traditional ways that people have always made it, and then really focus on just making sure it becomes their thing.
Do you think that's difficult in the sense of, like, I'm focusing now on the part where you said the panels. Mm-hmm. As a kid, I did not care. Well, I mean, I did care, but I didn't realize that I did. Like, as an adult now, I notice pacing and layout way more than I ever did as a child. Mm-hmm. And I can sometimes recognize a book as being good based completely on that. Like, it was crazy to me, like, I think it was Mr. Miracle. It was all written in 9-panel, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Which, that seems...
Very
like
Watchmen.
that was, well, yes, but it was specifically done in that way for keeping a pacing in that, you know. So, like, do you find when you're teaching things like that, they just don't get it? Like, do you have to just read and read and read and draw and draw and draw before you actually understand that? Or do you think some people just naturally have a gift?
I think depending on the person and depending on their level of literacy and whatever they read, the door is a little different as far as how you can open it for them. If they read a lot, they really get it. I mean, that's how almost every artist of any genre learns, is through mimicry, right? Like, that's what traditional painters have always done. They go to the Louvre or they go somewhere and they just copy it, literally copy it. So, you know, in 6th grade when I'm drawing Spider-Man the way McFarren did it, I'm learning how he draws.
Right.
And so when we talk about story, you know, basically what I like to do is give them a fundamental understanding of what panel transitions are, and then let them go to town. And then we talk about, like, okay, what are you trying to say to us here? Does the picture say that? Does this say that? And so then we can go back and really focus on the flow of it or the story of it. To your point, like, I don't think it comes natural to anybody, but the more you read it, the more you're really focused on it.
You were talking about picking up on how Todd drew. Now, when you were learning and when you were growing with your art, did you take certain techniques from certain artists and then incorporate them to your own, or how does that work? Because I would like to know that, actually.
I mean, there's a lot of great quotes out there. The one that I like a lot is that, like, your style becomes what you're always trying to fix. You know, and so your art style kind of develops because you're constantly drawing something a certain way.
Sure.
You're trying to fix it.
You're trying to fix it. So it's kind of like handwriting to a degree, right? Like, so if you're always going to make your A a certain way, like, you might, if you pay attention to it, you might be like, okay, it needs to be more slanted, or it needs to be more straight up and down. But if you never pay attention to your handwriting, you're not going to care how you make the marks. So if you're drawing something a certain way, it doesn't matter, like, because I would go from McFarlane to go to, like, at this point, to Jim Lee or to Mark Silvestri or to any one of those other ones, and it was like, you know, I don't really like to feather the way that Jim Aparo used to, you know, I like the clean line, or I like the weight of this, and I would just, you know, you just keep doing it. So then when Brayfogle came out, he was very influenced by design, and he had these great modern 80s sensibilities of panel design and these heavy blacks and these big geometric wild shapes. And you just keep, you know, you just keep repeating. So I'd go from one character to one character to one character, one style to one style to one style. And by the time I was like, ugh, I don't like the way that looks, then you end up with something that's more your own.
And how old were you when you realized you had talent, or that you loved what you were doing enough to continue on?
Pretty early. I mean, I've always drawn, like, we used to, in 3rd grade, we'd do these, like, who can draw the best horse contests, and, you know, I'd always, like, want to.
That's an ongoing contest in comic books still.
I know.
Who can draw the best horse?
I know.
Right now it's Joel Jones.
Far and away.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Which makes a sexy horse.
Yeah. I've heard stories about you, Matt, thinking sexy horses are sexy. So, I mean, I definitely, like, I was into art 100% in 3rd grade, 4th grade, elementary school. Like, everything that we did in the elementary classroom was blew my mind. It was amazing. And I just wanted to keep getting better. Middle school was when comics came in.
Okay.
Middle school was really when that came in. Let's see, 86, Dark Knight Returns. So I was 12 and 6th grade. And I remember...
We're going to have to go on a streak now. I think that book has been mentioned
Every time.
every podcast so far.
All right, I'm going to one up.
Well, we are of that age though, where it
It is, yeah.
it impacted
100%.
the most.
And well, so here's the thing too. So like I was, Comic Spinners. There's another one that
Yes,
keeps
yep,
getting
yep.
mentioned. I bought Wolverine number 1 and 2 off a Comic Spinner at Scott's Grocery up in Pine Valley, and still have them. But the way that Frank Miller told a story, I know Tim talked about it too.
Yeah.
But I really got into the mark making and the way that he would make a mark. And
He's very hard, or it's very, it's very frank, and there's no subtlety, there's very little subtlety in it.
yeah, well, and in that book particularly, it's the combination of him and Klaus Janson, and how Janson then went over the top of it and put his particular spin on it, which for me was also like back to Wolverine, like watching or looking at Bill Sienkiewicz ink over John Buscema, which was mind blowing to me. Like that was the perfect mix of everything. And so, my story. Well, quick story about that Dark Knight Returns. It was like I was always going to books, comics, and things, and we lived close to nothing. Like we were way out in the country, so that's why we were always buying stuff from Pine Valley Scots. And so every time I tried to get my parents to take me to books, comics, things, but Georgetown was so far away.
Right.
It was Westland Mall was so far away.
Yep.
So then somebody told me, like, this old hippie guy that my parents were friends with, like, it was like, okay, there's a cool store on Broadway.
Yeah.
Broadway Comics.
Broadway Comics.
And it was like every comic nerd's dream. Like you walk in, there's no windows. They're all covered in like paper and posters, and there's cobwebs swinging from it because it just never gets cleaned.
That's why it burned down.
So dirty.
It's never clean.
But that shop is like everybody here's AAA baseball. We all went through there before we went to them. Everybody.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
And we have a lot of books in the store that came from there because one of the guys that was working there, when it burned down, we bought collections from.
Yeah.
So I have a Wolverine, the miniseries 1, 2, 3, 4 that all have water damage from the fire at Broadway Comics.
Nice.
Fires don't cause water damage.
You know what I mean? The firefighters did.
I think I might have told this before, but the mural on the side of that building was the first time I realized, like, no, you're perpetrating. You can't. That's DC and Marvel characters.
Right.
That's not licensed. I was like 5, but I was the first time, like, the stirrings were there. Like, whoa,
You're like, you can't do that.
you can't do that.
And then there's Jeremy going, yeah, you can.
You're like, what are you? You think you're Perez? You can't do something like that.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are?
But the thing I got from there, though, was that Dark Knight number 2. So I have like first press, like first edition, but I got it the same day. I also walked out with like American Flag.
Yeah.
So I walked out with Daredevil, American Flag, Dark Knight Returns, a bunch of old X-Men stuff. It was all like nothing in bags. It was just...
So were you regular on Wednesdays? Like that kind of...
No, because I couldn't drive. I couldn't get anywhere.
But was that the best day of your childhood, though?
It was, well, the best, it was the best because I got validated. Because I was like, I picked up all this stuff, and and I had a stack full of like Spider-Man and whatever else on top that was coming out, and I put it on it, and there's this gnarly old troll behind the counter. And he's like, like looking at me and my mom is standing there like, I want to leave as soon as possible. And I'm like, yeah, I know, this is amazing. And I put the stack, and he's going through it and like just, snarkingly smiling at me like, oh yeah. And then he grabs it and he goes, oh, nice pick, young one. And I was like, oh, great.
I've been validated.
This was so amazing.
That's cool.
Yeah. So from there, like, once I could be mobile, then my friends and we would go out every Wednesday. So it wasn't until probably like sophomore year, sophomore
I grew
year of high
up
school.
When I was mobile. I was in a town that Fort Wayne was still my closest comic book store, and that was 50 miles.
Bro,
So
that's brutal.
Well, I mean, we had a place called the Newsstand, but it was like a small bookstore, and they'd have a few like weekly books, but it was always only like DC and Marvel. They didn't bother with anything off the beaten path. So it was a treat for me. I would go to the Georgetown Books Comics and things when we'd come to Fort Wayne, so that was where, I mean, it happened so infrequently, but
The Spider-Mans are over there, sweetheart.
yeah.
Well, I was really good friends with Todd Burnt from Burnt Comics in high school, and I would have to ride the bus for 45 minutes every day, and except Wednesdays, and he'd pick me up, and we'd go from Northrop out to Georgetown or head out to Westland Mall, and
That's so awesome.
yeah, just do our little round. And
Can you imagine being a normal person and not giving a shit about Wednesdays at all?
I know, and it's and especially like once they really started releasing the books, because at that point it was 1990, they still weren't getting in the millions, right? And
It was coming up though, because Spider-Man,
Well, I got a story about Spider-Man 300 too.
Yeah?
Yeah, I had all of the from the rack, all the.
You told me this once. I think.
Yeah, and I had all of them sitting next to my bed, and I had a whole
Yeah,
pile
I
of
heard
comics.
This is the cat story.
Yeah, this is the cat story.
cat story.
Yeah, the cat story. Yeah, so I mean, and the worst thing about the cat story though is that like we knew they were special when we bought them.
Yeah.
Because we were reading Wizard magazine and all that stuff, and so by then I was like, oh, these are gonna stay good. And then when I wake up and there's a giant pile of cat crap on cat diarrhea on the whole.
Did the cat
stack.
pee on him too?
It was just destroyed. I mean, it was, and then I had to step in it to know
That it was
had
there.
happened,
Yeah.
But it was literally all of that stuff, and so I was like, oh my gosh, I got to replace these.
What happened to that cat?
It ran away. No, I don't know. I don't know.
Someone released it in the night.
I moved out. No. Yeah. Because those shot up in value so fast.
Yeah.
That it didn't take so I couldn't find it ever. That's why I've never had it again.
Venom wasn't really a slow burn. Like
No.
a lot of characters that were introduced. Like Venom hit, and then it hit. And
Yep.
that was it. Yeah.
Anything with
But
fire. It was
but-
lightning in a bottle at that time.
But it was the Wizard magazines were the ones that, it was heralding in the new McFarlane.
Wizard was the old comic Tom too. It was like
I
pay
took
attention
care-
to
I
these
took-
books.
But that was also the first time, like Wizard had just come out, and then they were talking about 300, and it was the first time you had that where you knew what was coming, because no one had.
Yeah.
I loved Comic Scene even before that.
Yeah.
Comic Scene was great, and I'd make my mom order me shirts out of the back, and so we'd go down to Indy and I'd get like a Batman shirt, and I'd have something with like a Batman shirt, and I'd wear it to school in like 8th grade, and everybody was like, "You're such a nerd," and I'm like, "I don't really care." And then by the end of 8th grade, Batman was getting ready to be released, and all this merchandise came out, and I was like, I can get Batman. Yeah. And I'm like, but I don't really want the movie shirt. I want to go back to get that one.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, all of those, I feel like I got real lucky, honestly, because I had these like moments
For sure.
all along, and then I really got into Mike Mignola at that point.
Oh, I love his art so much.
Yeah, and
I love his storytelling too.
and it took me a long time. It's like I'm not super ADD too, so like I would read through stuff, but I needed something to keep me busy, and the art was the one that I just kept going back to it. So it took me a long time to really get into books, and so it took a long time for me to get the connection between story and art, and the fact that I can read all kinds of books. Like I'm actually a really good reader. I love to read. But having the combination of the pictures and the words now, it just
Tells
hits in
more
a
complete of a
different way.
story.
I think it can tell a different and more complete story, but I think it just stimulates the brain in a way for those of us that really like it. It just activates more of it to be able to tell a story.
Well, when you read a novel, or you read, especially science fiction or fantasy, the descriptors in there, you can take them differently than what the author meant. So when you actually have art, you can see what exactly they think the characters are
Not
to be
to mention,
representative.
and you and I both share this, and I think I have a lot of fun when artists are on. I mean, and when I talk to artists, because it's completely foreign to me. I'm not exaggerating. I cannot draw. I don't see pictures in my head, and that's why nothing comes out. My handwriting's terrible. There's nothing there at all. I mean, I can't draw. So
It is like magic.
It is like magic, and it's one of the comic books for me. It's not even like someone like you that you can emulate that. It's it's different from me because in my head, I could not design, I could not picture, I could not do these things in the same way. I mean, we're going to interview a writer a lot differently, I feel, because it's like I can write a story. I've written stories. Like in my head, I have these thoughts, and
I understand the process too a little better,
right?
To me, because literally art is magic to me. I love it, but I don't. So when I see someone that is proficient and very good at it,
it's crazy.
It is.
And I think that's what's really cool about you guys in particular and the shop in particular is that you're not afraid to really go out and talk to an artist in that way. Like, I don't need your praise all the time, but just like the interest in it, as a teacher, there's a lot of times where I have to convince even another staff member that what this kid's doing has value. Even if it's not to go make money on it, but just for that kid's soul for that moment.
It's not hard though. I mean, if you genuinely feel that way, it's crazy that every day we show up to work and it's filled with 30,000 Mona Lisas. It's fine 15,000 Mona Lisas. You know what I'm saying though.
Yes.
Like when you grow up on that, and that's like your art style, and those are the people that you appreciate, and when you study those lines and you study their styles, like those were my artists, and they still are my artists. Like in my head, every time I see anything done, as far as painting or otherwise, there's been enough artists in the comic medium, and I've seen enough styles where I've seen people paint things. I've seen people do it. Those are the paintings and all the other stuff that everything else is compared to. So I think it's genuine for us because that's what we grew up with, and that's what I am comparing, Dark Knight Returns to Van Gogh, because Van Gogh came, Dark Knight Returns came first for me as far as...
Frank Miller did a better job, though, so...
Well, the funny thing about that, here's my little education thing. Like, Van Gogh was really, really into Japanese prints. That's where a lot of his compositions and style came from, and Japanese prints were really just a precursor for comic books. So
makes sense.
So your metaphor or your analogy or whatever, little literary analysis.
Have you seen Frank Miller's Water Lilies? Fantastic. I'm just mixing stuff up now.
Frank Miller's Water Lilies with a little katana sword and a head stuck on it.
Precisely.
Yeah, there's a floating eyeball in the middle.
Now, why is it to me every time he has a new book or something come out, it looks like his art is devolving. Like it's...
So
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I would compare that to people talking about Picasso in the same way. So
is it because he doesn't have to try hard? He just doesn't care, or
no? It's a choice.
Yeah,
it's a choice to do things differently. As an artist, like as a fan, we want to see people doing the same thing all the time. I'm the same way. Like there's certain artists that Silvestri. Like I loved his stuff on X-Men.
Yep.
Loved it through about issue 75 of Wolverine. And then when he went to Image, I was like, okay, I'm done.
So I was going to save this because we were actually doing an Image. I stopped Wolverine when Silvestri stopped Wolverine. And then I think
most of America did, actually.
I tried to pick up Wetworks, and that's what let me know it's not just the art.
No. Well,
there has to be something else.
And here's a slightly nerdier version of that. It's also not just the art; it's the inker.
Yes, of course.
Silvestri with Dan Green, chef's kiss,
yep.
Right? Silvestri with Williams, the inks Jim Lee stuff. It's just not for me. Not that it's not good. And Silvestri's pencils, when he posts those pencils on Instagram, those are phenomenal. I still love
the Batman Joker.
The new one he's doing. They did that. Local comic shop, like half foil version. It was just the pencils.
And the pencils were foiled.
It was incredible. It looked like the graphite because of the effect.
But he does all the art, interior art and everything. He wrote it, and it's good. Fantastic.
Well, and so with Frank Miller, like if you look at his early work, he's very much Frank Miller Marvel House style.
Yeah.
Right? And then when he starts to pair up with Klaus Janson, even in the early 80s, he starts really thinking about things in a different way. When he gets to Dark Knight Returns and his Elektra Lives Again, he's really even paring down even more. So he's going away from the brush to a pen, which allows him different kinds of control. And then you work through that through Sin City, it has tons of drawing, but you don't see the lines anymore as much because it's more about the lights and the shadows and the darks. Then through 300, where 300 is like a colorized version of Sin City.
Yeah.
And now as he's going, I think it's a lot less about drawing less, and it's more about leaving more out. So it's like the thing about comics and art in general is when you're composing, you're making choices constantly. So even when you're focusing on like those big one-page spreads, you're kind of still making a choice to think about, okay, what am I going to focus on? So back to the Picasso thing, like he was a fantastic draftsperson. Like he could draw everything super realistically, but he's like, I'm not going to do that for the rest of my life. So now I'm interested in something else. Now I'm interested in something else. Now I'm interested in something else.
Okay.
So do you, and I'm asking from the perspective, like, so I grew up with music. I play music. I originally was going to go to school for it. And I don't listen to music the same way. Mm-hmm. So when I listen to a song, mm-hmm. I'm not like, oh, that made me feel. There's that there's that element of it still, but I separate it to frequencies, guitar, bass, drum, I mean, all kinds of things. Like what happens in a mix, what happens as far as, like, is it the same way with you in art?
Can be. It really can be. There's times when you are looking at the story, and there's times when you're looking at the line. There's times when you're looking at the facial expression. There's times where you're looking at the mood that's created.
Sure.
So, like, for instance, my new obsession is Friday by Ed Brubaker and Marcus Martin. It's unbelievable. The ability to tell a good story in words that don't always match up with the picture, to your point about telling a more fully complete story, because you have the ability to have that duality of image and words.
Which that would be, it only would work in this medium because you have to have that duality.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And you can not only have the duality, but you can have non sequiturs that can coexist, and it doesn't confuse you as much as something else because you're telling one whole thing, and it's not just like listening to someone's voice, right? Like those of us that are ADHD or have any kind of neuroatypical, even just typical people, like you telling me a story, I'm not going to retain nearly as much of the story. I'm going to get the high points, right? Even though, like this conversation, we're going in all these different directions, someone's going to remember the first and the last thing I say. So in a movie, you can have all these other visual images and have a voiceover, but in a comic, you're reading the words. And however we read the words individually, we're going to retain it as a picture. We're going to hold on to that. But then you're also showing us something along the way. So then you can complement or contradict whatever the words are saying. And then on top of that, you can just paint this gorgeous picture, right? Like you can set a mood, you can set a tone, you can say things that complement the words in a way that you might not be able to just do with words or just pictures.
For sure. So we're still in the origin portion, and we've gotten up to middle school.
Yeah.
No, this is great. I'm having a great time. I want to do this. So through middle school and then high school, I imagine it was, finding your voice, going into art classes. I mean, there's, sure, photography. I know you're big into photography as well. Like, what kind of, into college, like, what kind of coursework did you take, and then how did you arrive at still maintaining as being comics as the thing, even after exploring all the different mediums of art?
Honestly, through luck more than anything. I mean, when you're into comics as a kid and you're reading them, people don't really think much about it. But then as you're drawing them, it's a different story. They're like, oh, that's cute. But unless you know someone that has done something like that makes art for a living, you got to get a real job, right? And so, we talk about it a lot. Like, I think this generation is incredibly lucky because of the internet, because we know the possibilities of employment that are out there. We know people, even if we've contacted them through the internet, we know people that have worked on movies, right? We didn't know people that worked on movies.
No, it was like the Wild West of knowing nothing.
We didn't know people that worked on movies.
We live in an age where there are going to be 8-year-old kids that open toys on YouTube that will probably be doing that till they're 60 years old.
Yeah, there was a
Continue
story-
to open toys on YouTube, and that could be a job.
There's a story on NPR yesterday about these influencers, these little kids that have these YouTube videos that have millions of subscribers, and they're the influencers of their generation.
And no kid anymore wants to be an astronaut or a race car driver or a cowboy. They all want to be YouTube influencers. Period.
And that's the value that our society is putting on stuff right now. I mean, and it's like, and it's hard because, there's like I think we mentioned earlier, but the conversation about like gatekeeping or setting a tone, like that's what I tried not to do in the classroom, because that was what I felt like. I had some amazing teachers, like Al Jackway at Northrop High School was so supportive and an amazing teacher. He's why I eventually came back to teaching, because I didn't go to school to be a teacher. I just went to art school, and art school is kind of what really knocked comics out of my life for a long time, because it wasn't the value in 1993 in Columbus, Ohio, as good as that school is at churning out fine artists and advertising designers, and they're amazing at it. They weren't turning out comic artists at that time. So when you go there and you're like, oh, I'm going to go to art school with a capital A.
But is there really a pipeline there for placement? I think that's probably most of the problem. Like, does Marvel and DC have relationships with any of these big schools to be like, come on through here? And, because that's a big thing as far as a lot of the school. They do now.
They do now. They didn't then.
Yeah.
Like, we had a pipeline, and this, Hallmark greeting cards came through there. They had stuff. Some of the ad agencies. Columbus has a lot of corporate offices, home offices there.
Dude.
So they had a lot of advertising that come through there.
Can you imagine going through all of that? And you're like, what do you do? And you're like, I design cards for Hallmark.
You know what, though? Like,
I'm sure it's money, but that's just crazy.
And what a lot of people did is they went there and they got a pension and insurance, and then they made a bunch of stuff on their own.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah. And it was those critiques to even get to the point where you could present your portfolio were brutal. So when you talk about gatekeeping,
What do you think about the AI art movement too? What do you think that's going to do for the future? Or what are your personal opinions on that?
my personal opinion is, if it's a tool like any other tool that allows a human to do a job better, then it's fine. If it gets to a point where it's replacing human beings, then we have a problem.
I have
It still needs input.
No,
Right. I mean,
I've talked to other artists too, and the one that stuck with him the best was he said that he uses it. He does jacket work and stuff like that for books and stuff. He said he uses it, and he can replicate all those processes, but it would take him 100 times longer to do it. He can still do it, but it shortens or truncates a lot of his process.
I think the hardest thing is, this is where I get on my soapbox a little bit, but I do think that we are creating technology that is evolving faster than our human brains can keep up with it.
Yes.
And so we think of all the cool things that can be done with it, but we're not good at thinking of the long-term process, the long-term goals, or the long-term consequences, which that's human, right?
But if you have to, if it comes down to just having to put prompts in, do you think that hurts art because people aren't learning the process?
It's different.
Themselves?
It's completely different between creating Illustrator. You have things, you're doing digital art, and it will do a process as far as smudging and things like that, which you actually can do. It's a technique, and all you're doing is making a technique easier, but you have to have the idea to actually have that as part of the style. Do you know what I mean? All it is a tool for a job, and that's what you're saying. But some people are 100% feeding in, what does something look like if I feed in Adams, Lee, and McFarren, and it spits out something else? Like, that isn't art. Like, that is, in my opinion, because I know I can't draw. I am not an artist. And if I did something like that, I wouldn't call it art. That's me clicking a mouse button.
And that's a great point, because it does get to your definition of what art is, and it also gets to your choices about what you feel art is, right? And I think it does go back to what is the purpose of it? If it's just to see things, if it's just to play around, Kane White uses it for reference sometimes, or has used it for reference. Like, I've seen other people say, okay, well, what does this look like if I punch in this, 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 and this, and then, oh, that's a cool thing to draw, and then they turn around and draw it. That's a different story. But if it's like, well, I can't afford $1,000 to get X, I can't get Jeremy.
That was my worry, is that it will take the place of other artists creating actual art.
Right. But I think that there's always...
Never will, as long as the human eye is evaluated.
That's what I was going to say. I don't think that there's ever going to be a point where, like, you can look at it and be like, oh, yeah, I'm totally cool with that. And if it is, if someone is like, yeah, I'm totally cool with that, is it at a product that's really going to change
People
the
have
world?
cried listening to songs. People have cried watching, looking at pieces of art. Nobody has cried at the end of, receiving their McDonald's double cheeseburger. It's not the same as, like, automation taking over that industry.
Right.
I mean...
I think you're 100% right, though, about emotion. The emotion is the part of it. Like, right, it's the human connection. At a certain point, if we double back to it's the story that matters.
Yeah, but I think you're going to have people using it for, like, CD covers, LP covers, book jackets, stuff like that. I could do it, and I couldn't draw anything, or I couldn't paint anything, but I could create stuff in there that's.
I think, yeah. I mean, that's a worry.
I see people cheating with it. That's what I.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the worry about everything, but it also then comes back to the bigger conversation about the value of art.
Of course.
Like, what do we value of our art? Like, and now, I'm sure there are probably video game designers that have spent their entire career crafting this great game. They have worked with artists to craft these amazing
all
visuals.
the pre-rendered stuff is the same thing.
And then there's people that are going on these farms and downloading a rendered figure and running it through an XY equation and letting a side scroller do all the rest of the work. So if it comes to the fact that it's a great hobby, if it's something that is out there, if it's just something that even shows us the difference between what humans and computers do, okay, great. If it becomes something, again, where it's replacing the human, then I think we have a different conversation. But I also think, I also have to be realistic. Am I ever going to be affected by it, right? Like, is anybody ever going to do that instead of hiring me? I don't know. I mean, I might think differently if I'm getting paid to do it every day on a bigger scale.
Yeah, of course.
And then, once Skynet is launched and I'm
just like the one example is my favorite one at least. So the fed in every single Beatles tune into the AI,
Yeah.
and it wrote its own song, and it's the most Beatlesy Beatles song you've ever heard, right? Dude, it's not. I mean, I can tell the difference.
Yeah. Right.
You have to. That's the other piece of it is. I think the AI thing will be completely inconsequential if you have a population that is educated in what actual art is. Just like I am very educated in the Beatles, therefore I know what a fake Beatles song sounds like.
Auto-tune is a great example. Like,
yes.
when you fix people's natural voices and everything becomes flat and boring, you realize that the thing that makes art moving is not the perfection of it, but the imperfections of the human person that is making the art.
The false notes are better than the real notes sometimes.
The cracks, like hearing people in the background of the Stone song cheering each other on, like seeing the pencil lines, like even like
squeak of the kick drum on that first Led Zeppelin album, it was obnoxious.
Yeah,
I'd hear the kick, but I also hear that every time. I'm like, man, but I know it's there and I can't unhear it.
Now,
I love it.
Where technology is great, though, and where I go back to the internet is great. I think that the process videos that are all out there all the time, like even watching people draw, like when they recreate their Procreate drawing and they play that, all those replays, I think all of that stuff is going to always help because, you can look at a Procreate image and you're like, well, they just did it on the computer, so the computer did it all. And I'm like, again, to the point, well, there's some effects that takes me way long to do. I'm terrible. Jeremy, is terrible at color. So I use Photoshop and Procreate to fix my color all the time. But I'm making choices, right? And then you can see a replay of it, which means that you can see someone moving the stuff around, whatever it is, if it's a pixel or if it's a pencil. Now, again, there's taste. Like I we get in these arguments about what's good or what's bad, and you can always go back to taste. I just don't really like the way that line looks. Okay, cool. Right, good. I like the way a pencil on paper looks. I've done it enough. This is the weird art thing, right? Like I love wet watercolor paper. Like when you get it wet and it's this weird musty smell. It's like opening an old comic book. Like people are like, well, it doesn't look that way. It doesn't smell that way on an iPad. And you're like, no, it doesn't. And that's why it's not as good. But it's a whole sense thing. So art school.
Yep.
Transitioning back to that. Yeah. So art school was really good because I met my other best friend. But as far as like getting me to really figure out what I wanted to do for art, it wasn't. It was more confusing than anything. But I did get lucky because at that point I was totally out of comics. I wasn't paying attention to anything. I hated all the early 90s, like the direction of all that stuff. I hated it so much. And I don't, it's just me. It's a personal thing.
It's not just you.
Yeah. Well, and like it was the death of Superman and, the Bane and Batman, like all that stuff, like just millions and millions of comics. And I didn't really like anything that was being made. And like I had kind of gotten out of Sandman and all that stuff. So I was just at a point where like I didn't have any interest. I was poor. I couldn't buy anything anyway. But I stumbled across this like little underground shop in Columbus, this record store, and I found Jeff Smith and Paul Pope and Dave Sim, and all these underground heroes of the time. And like I wasn't really into.
For the people that don't know, can you explain those books?
Yeah, so I wasn't really into Dave Sim, who did a book called Cerebus at first. Like I really liked the art, but it was a little dense at the time, and it was way into the run, so I couldn't understand it. The weird little aardvark character running around and these like human characters, and you had to really understand the irony with which he wrote, and I didn't. But Paul Pope like smacked me in the head, and Paul Pope at that time it was THB, which was his self-published book, and Jeff Smith, who created Bone and went on to create, like, in my opinion, the best comic masterpiece, full volume run of any story, and they were all black and white, right? Yeah. And then I discovered the Los Bros Hernandez and Love and Rockets. And that stuff blew me away because it wasn't superheroes. It wasn't fantasy.
Yeah.
It wasn't science fiction. It was people in the same kind of situation that I was in, getting through life. And I read Lord of the Flies and Death of Speedy. And I like that Death of Speedy, like at the end of Death of Speedy, I was like, oh my God. Like it hit me in a visceral way. Like it stopped me. Like I had to stop and put the book down. It hit me so hard because of the emotional content. And most of that book, the end of that story, was wordless. So it was just 9-panel grid, black and white, strong lines, strong darks, but with enough of that human element in it that it just blew me away. And at that point, I was like, okay, I can't give this up. I can't quit you.
It's weird. Not from the art form aspect of it, but I think Shane included, we're all kind of similar ages, and we all kind of went through that journey where it's like,
well, you guys are
superheroes, and we're a little bit younger, but that just means I was a different age experiencing Death of Superman, right?
I also got really lucky at that age too, because one of my best friends ever was Corey Dawson, and he was super into comics at the same time, and he was like, I was still into like X-Men and superheroes and that kind of stuff, and he would way out there. Like he introduced me to Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
I wish he could have lived to see. There's so many things.
Yeah.
He passed in 2019,
yeah.
And yeah.
But he would go and he would say, okay, I know you're not really into this art style, right? Like, because I was like, oh, Jim Lee or Silvestri or whatever, and he'd show me Sean McManus, and I was like, well, the story is there, and then you can't stop reading them.
Have you had any of those that you have changed your mind on? I was talking about it in the story yesterday about how I hate younger me because I did not appreciate Texeira's art on Ghost Rider.
I always think Teixeira.
Teixeira. I don't know how to say any of these names.
Well, there's a pitcher.
It's tomato.
Yeah.
Oh man, I've been doing it all wrong.
There's a major league pitcher named Teixeira, and it's spelled the same, and I'm always like, that's gotta be it, right?
Yeah, it's Teixeira.
Teixeira.
Yeah.
Mark
Teixeira.
Teixeira.
Yeah.
Was drawing Ghost Rider at the time, and I did not appreciate that nearly as much as I should have. Like I look back now and I'm like,
With your plebeian eyes.
yeah, I was like, man, I was an idiot. I'm like, who was I to ever be judgmental about?
Well, heck, I didn't like Phil Hester's art on Quiver, the Kevin Smith run, and that like I evolved to like, oh, I see exactly what he was doing, why it was that way.
Yeah.
I think
So the question being,
Yeah, yeah.
have you had that same feeling about anybody where back then maybe you were like, and now you're kind of like, oh.
in 100 ways, 100 ways, and I am actually very thankful that I've been into something long enough that I've also grown with it enough to go back and experience it again. And really, I think my more regret is not being into something at the time, but not listening to someone else, like not giving someone else the opportunity to influence me. Right. And I think it goes back to that gatekeeper thing. You grow up with this thing of like, don't tell me what to do. I like my thing.
Don't tell me what to like.
Don't tell me.
And I always take it back, but I was kind of alone on comics, but my buddy that I had talked about, Matt Fulton, and previously, we both had comics together, but then we had moved away, and when I moved here, I didn't have that same connection with. We didn't have a comic book store, and nobody else was really comics. I was still into it, but I was alone. Music played a huge part in that, and that influence that you were talking about, that happened to me with music. Like while I was still listening to the music that the rest of the kids were listening to at my age, I had that friend's older brother that was like those 2 or 3 steps ahead of us, where like I was just figuring out about, I was listening to pop radio, and he's listening to like Sound of White Noise, Anthrax, and Dream Theater, and like all like that first Images and Words album, and showing me this stuff, and then I'm like, yeah, this is the stuff I should be listening to, and then, so like. That's the equivalent, like him showing you Sandman. Like I would given anything at that time period to somebody of showing me Sandman at that age.
And that's where I got really lucky. I mean, I really like give it up. Like I got super lucky with that. Like I got into skateboarding in 5th grade, so I had all of that stuff.
Yeah.
My friend David Wright and I bought a Thrasher magazine. There was like one of those little floppy long EPs in it, and I had Bad Religion on one side and Dinosaur Jr. on the other side. Puss Heads in the magazine. Robert Williams was in the magazine. You pull it out, and it's the same guy that did the album art for Guns N' Roses. And then, all these comic book heroes are talking about Robert Williams, and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's all connected. And then that leads to this and leads to alternative. And you have one friend that has a college-age brother. My friend Janine had this college-age brother, so like I did turn it on to REM and U2. And so you get all these ideas connected. And I just count myself very lucky that I had people like Corey at the time that he was into Caliber comics.
Yeah.
He was into... Sandman comics. He was into this comic called The Badger, which was just
So for people listening, just for context,
ridiculous.
Caliber was The Crow originally.
The Crow, yeah.
So they did other things, but that's the biggest probably property that they.
That's the thing.
And I ran into him. So I hadn't talked to Corey for a long time, and I ran into him. He was at Fantasticon helping with he was there helping one of the artists, and I ran into him. I started talking to him again, and then it was weird because I was friendly with him in school, but we really kind of started hitting off, and before he passed, I like weekly going back and forth about this or that. It was nice because he was like the nicest guy in the world too.
And he was so smart, and he would dive into the story. But
he also had so many. He loved games.
Yeah.
He had hundreds and hundreds of games,
and everything that he got into had that same passion.
Yes, skateboarding with his kids. Yep. Oh my God.
So to the point about like, have I gone back and I've reevaluated a ton of stuff, right? Yeah. Like for as far as story goes, like I've always kind of just thought, I've always been pretty like spread about with my influences. I like all this, I like that. I mean, I love Star Wars and I love science fiction, like hard sci-fi, but I love Lord of the Rings, like with equal love, right? Like equal love. I love the X-Men, still like all that stuff, right? And then I love Box Office Poison on Top Shelf. I love the Love and Rockets by the Los Bros Hernandez, and I love Mike Mignola, right? Yep. But I think what I've really gotten into is like the skill that it takes to craft a line or a composition as an artist, but also the subtext that it's included in a writer's prose, right? Like, what are they really telling? Is it a story about how this guy finds this magic box and he opens it up and it opens this world of possibilities through these magic dusts, and he goes over and he becomes rich and famous, and then because he's got all this stuff, nobody likes him, and then the dust finally eats him away into this little puddle. Is it really about that, or is it about like the hubris of the human man trying to take over more than what he should, right? And being able to build that subtext in to these fantastic stories.
Yeah, for sure.
It's unbelievable. Like,
And I think it's one of the best mediums for it, right?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Again, because to Matt's point earlier, like, you can invest yourself in it, right?
Yeah.
Like, even more so, like, this is like, okay, I'm getting into it now. But like, there's the words, there's the pictures, and then there's the space between the pictures.
Yes.
Right? And
Interpretation.
Like, there's so much that
else.
happens in the space between pictures.
I mean, and I would love to keep going.
Yeah.
No. Honestly, I love this stuff. But I want to get to the point where we discuss.
We don't see daylight from the deep hole
Right.
we've just dug in now anymore.
We need to get to the discussion where, I mean, you guys already had a previous relationship, but I'd like to move it up to the point where
So
the store is an idea, and then,
Yeah, so-
our meetings and stuff initially as far as the shop.
So the store was an idea. We had started talking about it hard. We started making
established
inroads.
we are doing it.
Yes, and then I had approached you and I said, "Hey, I know a guy I went to school with. I love his art. I love his line art. I love the way." So I showed.
You're like,
Craig-
he's real artsy, he takes pictures and shit.
He's real active on Instagram.
Yes. And so I had shown.
Have you seen the pictures of the shadows of the corner of his room?
There you go.
Chef's
Yes.
No, it was that. It's still a big joke between us. He's like, no, seriously, he's real artsy. He takes pictures of shadows and shit. And I was like,
Meanwhile, scrolling through your feed to try to find it.
I thought he was saying that as like an expression,
Facetiously or
like he
something.
was explaining a type of person. And then I get to the Instagram, I'm like, this is legit pictures of shadows. He's like, no, I was being serious. Like, he takes pictures of shadows. I was like, oh, like literally.
But his art is fantastic. And-
Everybody had to get through COVID somehow.
Yes. No. So then we. Hi, Luna. How you doing, sweetheart?
Hey,
So we fast forward. I reached out to you. We all met at Conjure Coffee, and then you guys met for the first time ever. And hello, birthday girl. It's my daughter's birthday today.
Happy birthday. Happy
birthday.
Awesome.
So we met at Conjure. We sat down. We talked
Yep.
because we said we had two things we wanted you to do. We wanted you to do our logos, and then we had a comic we wanted you to do a cover on.
Yeah. And that was really great too, because the logo thing, like, I've done tons and tons and tons of my own stories and just haven't done anything with them. You know, I've got crates of drawings at home and
Sure.
stories that aren't started, but I've made often logos for people or little designs for people. And so when you approached me about the logo, I was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. And then, you know, the self-conscious side of me is like, who, you need to draw a comic cover? So that, for me, was the most exciting part of it.
Plus, the book really lent itself to your art style. Like the cover you did for it, it fits so well with the art style and the interior of the book as well.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to do, honestly, like, I sent you, I think, 8 different sketches. I
Yeah,
kind of
you
wanted
did.
to do, like, 5 of them. I was like, let's just do 5 variants because they'll all be so good.
yeah. No, it was cool as far as experiencing it on our side too, because I had to that point at least have never commissioned art, especially like a.
Oh yeah, I never either. So
So-
it's kind of I feel
We were excited because of the book. So for those of you who don't know, because I'm going to give you the opportunity, you can actually on our website. We have this available for purchase. The cover that Jeremy had done. So going back even to our very first podcast, Origin Story, year 1 on our opening day, Jeremy was there. Doing signing because he was on the cover of the book that we had on opening day. So it was Postmasters by Garrett Gunn, Christina Blanche, Dave Lentz, and all that team. As far as the team that usually does Good Boy, but this is their new book, Postmasters. And so we had already confirmed that we were going to do a store exclusive, and we had this idea that we wanted to do this, and we approached Jeremy like, hey, would you be interested? And we kind of had this idea where we're like, okay, well, we're in a 100-year-old firehouse. We want the 100-year-old firehouse to be in front of it, but it's like post-apocalyptic. So make the building all screwed up and the character, and like come up with some designs. I think you came up with like 8 of them or something like that.
It was 8.
Yeah. And then you sent
still
them,
have
you sent it back, and it ended up being like even better because so you had like the character where it's like the face and the sword is like covering the face, and the building is actually in the reflection of the sword. It wasn't just like drawing the building. So it was real cool and artsy, right? You know, like I said, it's all magic to me. I'm like, oh, how do you even come up with these things? So then we get that going, and then so you get the shit. I mean, you were actually there. This is one of the only people we'll ever have on here ever talk to that actually know that we're not just bullshitting about that first day about how it was like.
It was awesome.
Wall to wall. Like,
yeah. It was a great thing to be a part of, because not only is it your venture and it's your first thing, it's your first day, it's Christina and Garrett's first thing with that book, but the whole day was a celebration. Like, to me, it felt like a celebration. I'm sure you guys were.
Oh, we celebrated when it was done too.
Yeah, and I'm sure you were exhausted during the day, but like every time I saw you, you were smiling. You know, you were talking to people.
dream come true.
It is one of the best days of our lives.
Yeah.
It was.
And
It's
it
the
was-
validation of everyone showing up.
And I think what is amazing about the way you two work together, and again back to like talking to artists and stuff, is like the validation of like someone's work, right? And it was great to be in a place where everybody was celebrating that. You know, it's great to be in a place that celebrates the things like comic books and Funko Pops and games and books and all that stuff.
We've got, you know, anybody that sends us, anybody that has anything as far as a book they've written or whatever else, we have it in the shop. Like that's nobody. We talked about it previously too. I mean, I know nobody is privy to those conversations, but like, it's not very often. Like, the internet's a pretty cool tool as far as like you can get discovered, but 99.999% of people, they get there through hard work, and hard work includes making your own comic book,
Right.
selling it at a shop, and you have to have, you have to have that help, and you have to have that validation. I mean, legitimately, you and a handful of other people that we actually know in town are some of the best artists I have ever seen. And it's not like there's a lack of artwork that we've seen.
No, yeah.
And it's like-
We're surrounded by it, but
And it is so,
who would think Fort
it's funny
Wayne?
because you guys are appreciative. Like, we're doing something and it's like, no, we like what we like, and it's awesome. You know,
I
so
mean-
it's cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And like, to your point about the internet and being discovered, it's like I tell my students, it's like if you're in a thimble on an ocean, like that's your chance of getting discovered.
Yeah.
You know, so even back to what we talked about, the community and me being lucky, and it's just having people that are constantly, encouraging or reinforcing the idea that this is valuable work and this is something that we can celebrate. And then because
How did that make you feel? I mean, personally, we've kind of described multiple times because our painting was, setting up the store and arranging it and getting all that around, but you have an actual legit cover. Like, how did that make you feel? I mean, just from the
I mean,
emotional standpoint.
like I love it. I mean, anytime, like I always joke, like,
because you have students that come in and buy it. They're like,
Yeah.
it's so cool.
I mean, I like that's the thing, like, because I've made my own mini comics. I've made several mini comics. I've done several things on my own. Like when we had Appleseed or Summit City Comic Con,
Yep.
that always gave me a reason to get something done and get out of those crates of sketchbooks and like actually finish something. But I paid for everything. I had to figure out how to do it. I had to working full time through kids, so everything was
And this time you got to pawn that off on us.
Right, well,
I'm just kidding.
that's the point, is like I want eventually for someone to pay to publish my stuff. Like that's
sure.
That's my goal, is like eventually to take something and that it's like I did not pay to print it. I don't care if I made a much on it. Like
Right.
I
Yes,
don't want to have
yeah,
to pay.
yeah.
And that's
it has to be a lonely process a little bit too.
It is. It's always made worse when you have imposter syndrome kick in or something like that, because, to your point earlier, like you're always going back and like thinking about something or hearing something. And sometimes you kind of forget it's the act of making it that's more important, right? And I think in those situations, it finally gets to the point where the act of making it takes over whatever the final product is. And if you can really dive into just the beauty of the act of creation, like that's the joy. And
this podcast is the closest that we're probably going to come to that. Like we're at this point, we are creators, and
yeah.
we
How many people say they're going to do a podcast and then they buy all the shit and it just sits in their basement, right? Like now you're doing something with it. So like it's,
Heroes of 40-year-old men everywhere.
that's right. you're in the Nerd Hall of Fame.
no, but
And we got a store.
And
this is
you
about
got
as
a store.
But it takes a little bit. Like remember,
Yeah.
when we hit go now, it feels a lot. It doesn't hit as hard as when we hit go the first time. Like, do you think my voice sounded squeaky? Like, yes, it sounds squeaky. Shut up and get over it. Let's
know.
go.
Yep.
Yeah. So
And you're in the attic, not the basement. So
Right,
you got
there you
this
go.
gorgeous sunset view going out over there.
Balmy
So
Fort Wayne.
you're on top of the world.
so, I mean,
So that day was great because it was a celebration. And, you know, as a teacher, you do get to know tons of people. So,
For
like
sure.
you said, you had my students came in. I had my students come in. Like, I have kids. Their friends came in. Like, I'm friends with their parents. So they came in. So I also feel very lucky that I have a supportive group of people that want me to do well. So they'll buy my stuff or commission me for a comic
Yeah.
or drawing or something.
and it's not just like when you're here. Like people stop by all the time. They're like,
Yeah.
hey, where's that McFarren book at? I'm like, which one? Which one?
They're like, oh, that one? Oh, you can put it back.
no,
Is there a new
they're looking
Superman?
for your stuff. And we're like, are you sure you don't want to buy our book? they're like, no, I want this one. I'm like,
I want the little
Fine,
one. I want
fine.
the little one with monsters on it.
I love the color. I still can't get it. Like
that metal that we had created was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life. The orange and the purple on that.
So that's
Yeah.
actually so here's the imposter syndrome, right? But that's back to technology. That is a case of Photoshop fixing the color. Like I had a color scheme that I picked out, and again, I'm terrible with it. So the drawing, loved it. Like I came up with the composition totally fine. You know, the idea of, you know, doing a little less to show more. I love all that, kind of getting all in my head about it. And I start putting colors on there and it just goes to hell so fast. And then I just put a color over it and messed with a setting on a layer, and all of a sudden the colors popped in. And so like then I could go back and choose colors and choose the way it fit. And that's the way that's the only way I can work with color anymore, is to really either start with a process that I know I can experiment with that will give me a certain result, even if I can't control it. It's a little controlled chaos, or it's like, this is the color, this is the color, this is the color, and don't vary from it.
Well, and that was the first time I always got off on the fact that you were sending updates.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, not like we were, not from a deadline perspective. It was like here's progress. And it was mind blowing. I'm like, I'm out shopping, like doing something stupid, like
Yeah.
grocery shopping. And then I'm like, it's like ding. And I look and I'm like, holy shit, that's our cover. It was awesome.
it was a really cool moment.
Yeah.
So
And then is it, and that whole collective feeling is what we strive for, you know?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's cool. I'm glad you're here finally, because you're just as much part of this store as anybody, right?
Well, I
mean,
appreciate that.
You helped launch it legitimately.
appreciate that.
And so it's awesome, and it's great to have you here.
I
Yep.
appreciate it. Especially because I got to do most of the launch from my chair at my desk, and you guys had to drive across the Midwest to pick up bookshelves and put them
Dude.
back together in a blizzard.
100% worth it.
It was.
100%.
It was.
Plus, we've got a bunch of funny stories out of the deal.
Yep.
And fortunately, I've got to meet a bunch of people that Matt knew ahead of time, like you and Tim, and, bringing that to the table has been, it's all about relationships. It's all about ideas. And we know all kinds of people with great ideas and have forged all kinds of great relationships.
Yeah. And we can shout out Tim just a little bit and his encounter with Ian Ziering just for a second.
Dude,
in all of Ian Ziering's tens.
But just a second though, because Tim doesn't need it anymore.
He doesn't need any help.
He doesn't.
He's
Now that he's officially broken the guilty pleasure part of the podcast.
He's on his childhood heroes back wall of his podcast now. So I'm gonna pour one out for Tim. Like, he's got it.
One for my homie.
He's got it, and I honestly I love that dude. He's
fantastic.
a really amazing person.
I've got his signed poster on my wall.
It's great stuff.
They live.
So, Jeremy, what do you got coming out? What do you got coming up? What's going to be coming out? So what are you putting together?
So in October, I put together a mini comic. I call them my little micro comics. It's based on the song "The Night We Met" by Lord Huron. I did it for an event at Science Central that Rcade helped to sponsor our table. It was pretty fun, but again, it was a deadline, so it gave me time to do something, and that really.
Do you work better with that, honestly?
100%, yeah, because I'm too, it is ADHD, it is all that kind of stuff. My executive functioning to schedule out something is terrible.
So I'm diagnosed with the same. So in college, does the deadline make it so that you can actually force yourself to stay up and just get it done? Because mine's different. I had to, because of that, I still, at the last minute, I was never a term papers due tomorrow, I need 20 pages. I knew I wouldn't do it. So I had to get the syllabus, figure it out, and work on it 15 minutes at a time.
Yeah, I could.
But I still needed that deadline in order to even accomplish that.
Yeah, I'm more the same. I've pulled one all-nighter in my entire life, and that's all the way through art school. So that comic, I work really good, and I realize I like little short stories, but I like short stories that lead to bigger things that are more connected. So I'm working on a series of comics based on different songs, Lord Huron songs. I'm trying to get my good tagline, but I'm trying to make it something that is just a mashup of all my favorite things, but also comment on like some of the crappy parts about where that stuff came from. So I call it like a Lovecraftian sci-fi noir, Americana noir. And I really want to comment on like the idea of colonialism and imperialism and all these great treasure stories. I mean, I love Indiana Jones, right? I love Indiana Jones. Part of my childhood, but everything he did was terrible.
Yeah.
Right? But it's great, right? So how do we draw that line? So what I'm trying to do is write these stories that feel that way, but also comment on where I feel like we need to go to, and yet still have a lot of fun with them. So space monsters, some sci-fi stuff, lots of black magic and rituals and things like that. And what I want to do is tell that story, tease that story out one panel at a time, 1 week at a time on my new Patreon that I'm going to launch in March.
So why don't you want to take a few minutes to talk about that? Or
yeah, so I have been working on a pitch for an animated series right now, and that's taken like all my time.
Is this the same one?
Yeah, but I can't really talk about it.
Yeah.
Man, so I can't talk about it. But it's almost done.
Okay.
And so now I'm really looking forward to my next thing. So back to the deadline thing. If I don't have something to work on next, I'm not going to work on something. Yeah. Right. And I'm also, because I'm so ADHD with this, like if I don't strike while the iron's hot on it, as it were, I'm not going to ever come back to it again. So I have to have a deadline to keep going. So what I'm going to do on the Patreon is do updates on the pitch, give some insider, hopefully, information about how to develop a pitch, what goes on to it, and as like a little journal, but also then once a week offer a panel of the story. And then
which will also force you to get it done based upon your...
force me to get it done, yeah. Which is why I have 4 stories written so far and thumbnailed out, which is fun to share. But also then I can offer other exclusives, so we can do different kind of commissions and different kind of work. So right now I have, and again, it forces me to work in a format, right? Because otherwise I just want to go, I want to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, which is fun. It's a lot of fun. But I just feel like I'm at that point where, like, if I'm gonna get someone to pay to publish a book for me,
needs to go beyond doodling.
I need to go beyond it or being distracted. Right. So, I've done several of these little mini comics. When my kids were little, I published a book of these lunchbox doodles I used to do to them. I used to do a lunchbox doodle every day. I've done different things I have on my website, but now it's really...
Which your website is what?
My website is jeremyjmcfarren.com, and I have a shop where you can see my books as well as some of the work I've done.
And your Patreon, you'll have a link through there, I'm guessing,
I'll
at that
have a
point.
link to there.
Okay.
It's not live yet. It'll launch.
When is it
March.
launching? March?
It'll launch March. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm based on our previous conversation. It'll launch March 5th.
Okay.
Which
Which is significant.
It's very significant. Yes.
because
That is the Arcade's 1-year anniversary that weekend. So on the 4th and 5th, we're going to be having sales, but also Jeremy is coming back for our anniversary. He's going to be in store on the 5th, Sunday, correct?
and we'll
The actual
celebrate
day.
again.
And we're going to celebrate again. It'll be exactly a year to the day. So he'll be out here. You'll have all your books. You'll be doing commissions, I'm sure.
Well, yep.
So
And I'll have you can hit me up on the website before that too, so we can do some pre-orders.
for sure.
But that way I can keep working on this thing that I'm really passionate about over here as the pitch, and that it's like launching the store. It's kind of a slog until you get to the point, right? You're trying to keep that momentum going, and with my brain, I always need this other thing going, and that's what this will be. And I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited to try to
Sounds like fun.
hit something that I haven't seen before.
So I think we ask everybody.
We're going to ask everybody your
5 questions, yeah.
and it's that time.
Sounds good.
So, Mr. Jeremy.
Thank you very much for
Yes,
the
thank you for
information.
coming. It's been great.
This has been a lot of fun. Like it was one of those good circling talks.
Yeah.
What were we talking about?
We do that very well.
That's good. Yeah.
That's why people listen to these things. They don't want us to pay attention. Everybody that listens to a podcast has ADHD, and I think they have more fun if we were like, what was the question again?
Wait, what?
Who?
Why do we keep circling back to
Where are we?
Yeah.
So the first question I have for you is, what comic, novel, or piece of literature had the biggest impact on you or changed how you viewed the world, and why?
I thought about that question a lot, and it's really hard for me to answer that because I love so many forms of art, and I've been changed radically through so many pieces of art. But I think I have to settle on the fact that to keep me busy at my grandparents' house, my parents went to the grocery store and bought one of those multi-packs of comics that Marvel used to do.
Yeah.
And it had Transformers #1, G.I.
Bill Sienkiewicz.
Bill Sienkiewicz, yeah. The G.I. Joe silent issues at 21.
Yep.
21.
21, which blew my mind, and something else. I don't know what else it was. So I think those things, especially G.I. Joe 21,
Yes.
that told the entire story with no
Without-
pictures.
yes, without
Or
dialogue.
with no dialogue. Just like it changed how I saw comics.
That's awesome.
That
It's
is.
a good answer.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks.
Who are 3 of your favorite artists of any genre?
It depends on the day you ask me.
Yeah.
Well,
say I'm asking you on
So
a Friday.
We're
So-
asking you today.
Friday, early March. Well, I'll go traditional art. I love Alphonse Mucha,
Okay.
who is an artist of the Art Nouveau period in the late 1800s, early 1900s in France, and his control of line was just unbelievable. He would do these giant 3-foot by 6-foot drawings for advertisements, and his line was just unbelievable. And I think through him and through some other stuff, that's where I really got into really being able to focus on line. If you think of painters, I fall in love with ideas more than I do fall in love with like a technique.
Okay.
So there's a lot of really great stuff in the postmodernism that I love, but I also I just really love Van Gogh's stuff because of what he did as a painter. But comic books, like I could list a mile long, but the one I'm just going to settle on is Darwin Cook. 'Cause
Okay.
Darwin Cook has pretty much changed how I've done things in my own work for comics for the past like 15 years. And he just, from Batman, Ego, to Parker, to the later stuff he did with Gilbert Hernandez was just perfect. It was just perfect for me.
My second favorite comic of all time was Darwin Cook's New Frontier.
It's unbelievable.
It's the greatest thing in. Oh my gosh.
The way that again,
Story and pictures.
It's not just the writing. It's not just the pictures. It's the way he told the story.
Fair enough. Science fiction or fantasy?
Also depends on the day. I would have been fantasy for a while, especially in high school. I really was into David Eddings back in high school, which told these grand Tolkien-esque, very super racist stories. Which when I reread them, I was like, yeah, no, I can't do this again. So then I replaced it with Tolkien, and I was like, well, that's better. But I also I like to watch sci-fi
Yeah.
and read fantasy.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
What TV show or movie is your guilty pleasure?
So here's where I get all Brene Brown on you, and I'm like, I don't have a guilty pleasure. I watch things for pleasure. It's all Lord of the Rings.
It's all
Lord of the Rings.
Turn it on every
Rings
time.
of Power, Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that was such a good show.
Oh gosh, and the extended editions, by the way.
You have to.
Oh,
You have
yeah.
to. There's no playing around.
Yep.
You can skip most of the Hobbit movies though. But
Yep.
I'm still waiting for a day where snow or inclement weather coincides with everybody actually having a time
Yes.
to wait. I'm planning a extended edition movie
Marathon.
Yeah, it's always been my sick day movie.
Yeah.
And I should say, like, even the ones that aren't so great, I just watch everything Marvel right now. It doesn't matter how good they are, like they're superheroes on a screen.
Yep.
Yeah.
You got
Well, yeah, it helps you decompress and it
So
helps you
good.
turn your mind off
So
sometimes.
fun.
All right, the last one. Who would you fan cast for a live action Harley Ivy movie, and what direction would it take?
I have done a lot of thinking about this, like a stupid amount of thinking about this in the past 57 minutes. As Harley, it would have to be Craig Ray.
Me?
And Ivy would have to be Matt Cade.
Yes.
And
You got to have the pigtails though, dude. You got to do the pigtails.
well, I'm thinking so pigtails, but also one of those plaid hunter's hats, because have you ever seen the movie Grumpy Old Men? Stay with me. Stay with
No,
me.
I'm on
I'm
board.
hunting wabbits.
I'm thinking Grumpy Old Men.
Once you mentioned me working for Warner Brothers, I was on board.
Yeah, 100%. But at some point there would be this little circle that opens up in your driveway, and Bugs Bunny would pop out, and then it would cross into Space Jam territory. So you're welcome.
Do I just get to wear like a thong and like green body paint though? That's what I want.
So at that point, I've sold the property and I'm out of development, and my name will not be attached to it.
I mean,
I can see it working now.
I see myself more a Harley than Ivy. So I mean, that part of it, I can.
You got the pigtails for
It's
it.
a sultry one.
You got the hair.
Yeah.
You're the wild card.
You have the psychotic afterglow.
Yeah. And as far as color palette, I mean,
Pale.
well, pink and blue would work
You do have those hyenas for
for whatever
reasons
reason.
unknown. Yeah.
Yeah.
Best friend's named Kevin.
That's
That's not even true. Sorry. You're-
I'm shaking my head. Okay.
no.
This works. Let's workshop
that
it.
was-
Let's workshop
so
it.
The new Harley Quinn arc in the books, like one of the big deals as far as like when the solicitation's reading it, like so Stephanie Phillips is writing it, and like I'm reading, I'm like excited. I'm like, they're rebooting Harley Quinn. It's number one, and I'm reading the solicitation, and I'm like, blah blah blah, and introducing her new best friend Kevin. I was like, what the hell is this book going to be about?
Man.
Ended up being much better than just talking about her new best friend Kevin, but it was interesting. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much for coming out, Jeremy. It's always a great time when
Honestly,
you're
it was a blast.
It
It's
is
a lot of fun.
every
Thanks
single
for having
time
me.
you come here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, guys. I really appreciate you reaching out about the logo and working for you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
With
minor
us,
thing.
with us,
But
not
that,
for us.
well,
We can have you in the basement.
Yeah, I agree, but like, but I really though I appreciate like the job,
yeah. No, I mean, we know what you meant.
but I really appreciate the talks that we've had. Like that's really been the true gift. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you,
Peace.
Matt. Do your thing.
He's got a lot of things to
I
do.
do have a lot of things. So, everyone out there, please support your local comic book stores. They are not doing as well as you think they are. And thank you for listening once again. We will Be
Talk to you
back
soon.
soon.
Thanks,
Read
everybody.
comics. Bye.
Bye.